by saying, as a reminder, that there will be no Bible study next week. As you are aware, we are all meeting down on the vacant lot because we're being ousted out of here. And by the way, I understand that the biblical reference for next week is the story of Lot. And how balls of fire came down on everybody out in the open. Ought to be an interesting worship service.
That's serious? I mean, we're really getting kicked out of here?
Yes,
Yeah, next
for
Sunday.
just that one Sunday.
Just in here, not out
No,
of the chapel?
the chapel and everything.
Gotta leave the premises.
Worship down on the vacant lot. You're supposed to dress up in grubs, bring a lawn chair, and be prepared for the worst.
No. Bring your vacant lot clothes.
Whatever.
Lot clothes.
Okay. Today.
I suppose we can bring our wine, huh?
We could.
You probably could get away with it. Today we begin with the parable of the weeds from Matthew chapter 13, verse 24. And the 6 parables that are left, 2 today, and then after next week, 2 more weeks, are parables all having to do with what the kingdom of heaven is like. Okay? Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling up the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let them both grow together until the harvest, and at that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, and then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." The events in this parable would have been crystal clear to anyone in a Palestinian audience 2,000 years ago. They would have gotten the point and understood immediately what Jesus was talking about. Although the meaning isn't quite so clear with us today. I mean, how many of us know about weeds in the fields in Palestine, right? The weeds, called tares, T-A-R-E-S, were a curse. They were an absolute curse to every farmer in Palestine. They were actually called, today you would call them what's known as bearded darnel. Isn't that interesting? No. In its early growth stage, here's the problem. In its early growth stage, the bearded darnel so closely resembles the wheat, it's virtually impossible to tell them apart. You can't tell one from the other. By the time they mature and headed out, it was a lot more easy to distinguish them apart. But by that time, the roots of the weeds and the wheat were intertwined and tangled together and twisted, so it was impossible to pull up the weeds without pulling the wheat right out with them. Farmers would never make the attempt to weed the tares out early because you couldn't tell the good from the bad. And then you couldn't do it later because they were hopelessly tangled. So you had to leave the whole thing until harvest time. In fact, the 2, wheat and bearded darnel, are so much alike that the Jews called the bearded darnel bastard wheat. And said that it had originated in a time of wickedness preceding the Great Flood, a time when all was brought forth contrary to nature's intent. So that darnel was wheat that had gone wrong. That was their explanation for the whole thing. Well, finally at harvest they had to be separated because on top of everything else, the grain that comes from the darnel is poisonous. And it can cause dizziness and sickness. it's actually a narcotic. Narcotic has a very bitter and nasty taste to it. So all these little grains from the wheat and the darnel had to be separated out by hand. It was laid out on a big board, and of course the women were given the job of sitting there and picking through, getting rid of the darnel, keeping the wheat grains. And hi Jay, how are you? So it was a very meticulous job of having to pick through the grain. And the problem is that there's only one small difference, and that is a slight difference in color. So it was a very meticulous job. You had to really get down there and pick your way through this to get rid of the bad stuff. Now, we can understand why the actions of a man who deliberately would sow darnel into somebody's field was a pretty dastardly act. That was bad. It was actually known to have happened in those times. And to do that was a crime forbidden by Roman law. That's just how bad this kind of thing was.
That's the Holy Spirit coming in.
That's okay. Believe it or not, the Holy Spirit is welcomed here.
We do have two or more.
That's right.
Yes. So severe punishment could be the result if you got caught seeding darnel into a man's field. So all of this information would have been known to people who were listening to Jesus tell this parable. And they would get on right away what he's talking about, because it was the kind of thing that actually happened. Now, if we are wondering why this description is like the kingdom of heaven, we are wondering, aren't we?
Yeah, I am.
Everybody says, say yes. Then we would most likely ask the same question the disciples did at this point. And they said, Jesus, explain to us the meaning of this? Disciples were just about as far out in the left field as we are, I guess. He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, Jesus. The field is the world. The good seed stands for the sons of the kingdom of heaven. The darnel represents the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed the darnel is the devil. The harvest takes place at the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Well, how did I come up with that? I didn't. It's
Good.
It's in the Bible. Oops. I'm lost.
Verse
We
37.
all are.
We knew that.
Thank you.
But now you're fine.
Thank you for the vote of confidence.
I think Scott has it.
1337.
Yes, I'm trying, I've got it, but I've got my Bible marked in the wrong place. I'm looking for 13, pages was that? 40 through 43. No, 30.
37 maybe?
Because it says right in these verses, the disciples said, explain to us the parable. The one who sowed the good seed is the Son. The field is the world. The good seeds for the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. See, I didn't know that. I took that out of here. Okay. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the fiery furnace where there will be
Gnashing of teeth.
weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So, we have this story that is a very real event that could occur in Palestine. We now understand the symbolism of each of the different parts of the story, and you may think, oh, that was pretty cool. Well, now we come to some of the real meaning below all that. We're down to level 3. Level 1 was the story, level 2 was the explanation. Now we come to the real meat of this parable. There are 5 lessons in this parable, each of which teach us about life. Number 1, there is always a hostile power in the world that waits in the wings, seeking to destroy the sons of the kingdom. 2 kinds of influence act upon our lives. That which helps us to grow healthy and flourish, and that which seeks to destroy us before we can produce good fruit by our efforts. We must ever be on guard as a result. Lesson 2. It is hard to distinguish between those people who are in the kingdom and those who are not. There are people who can appear to be very good, and in reality are very bad people. Likewise, there are people who appear to be bad, but are actually very good. And the lesson for us here is that we are often way too quick to judge and classify people because we don't know the whole story. And so true judgment has to be very patient and wait until the very end when the harvest takes place. Lesson number 3. We shouldn't be so quick in our judgments. In the story, if the reapers had had their way, they would have torn out the tares, and in doing so, destroyed the wheat along with them. A person in the end will not be judged by a single act or stage in their life, but by their whole life. In other words, people can make big mistakes, but then redeem themselves through God's grace. On the other hand, a person can live a very honorable life, but in the end wreck it all by a sudden collapse into sin. You cannot judge the whole when all you can see is a part of the whole. Judgment has to come at the end. 4th, judgment does come. Judgment takes place. It may not be hasty, but it's inevitable. As we look at other people in our lifetime, this is one of the things that always bothered me. How come there are so many horrible people, sinners, who escape the consequences of their actions and instead get a lot of goodness and reward? It never comes to those who seem to deserve it. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? What's going on here anyway? In the end, everything will be reconciled. And finally, the only person who has the right to judge is God. He alone is the one who can discern the difference between the wheat and the darnel.
So God's a woman?
Beg your pardon? Of course.
Okay.
No, the women had to do all the work. And
No, he asked
separate
if
them.
God is a woman.
I don't know, I imagine.
God is probably both.
If he's
I don't
picking,
know.
that's
Yes.
the thing.
He alone, or she alone, can see all of a person, can see all of their life, can see all of their heart, and he can sort it out. Any comments on that parable?
Well, I think it's good. It's a very good explanation.
Well, Better say it's good. It was Jesus' story.
You did it very well.
You did it very well. I think God just spoke.
Now we have a second parable, and I'm going to be adding my own personal comments to this one because I have some questions I would like to ask about this one. It comes from Matthew 18, verses 21 through 35. It's the parable of the unmerciful servant. Peter came to Jesus and asked him, you've all heard this, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. The servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him by the throat and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison. When the other servants saw what happened, they were greatly distressed and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. He said, you wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master turned him over to the jailers to be tortured until they could pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. I don't know about you guys, I like Peter. I've always liked Peter. He had a sharp tongue. He was very impetuous. He rushed into things without thinking. He was reckless. And I like it, because I do all the same stupid things. And you know what? We ought to be really happy that Peter was that way, because that motivated Jesus into teaching a lot of truths because of Peter's attitude and actions. Now on this occasion, Peter thought he was really being generous. I mean, he asks how often he ought to forgive somebody. And then he answers his own question by suggesting 7 times. Jewish rabbinic teaching said that a man must forgive 3 times. On the 4th time, the law said no more forgiveness was necessary. The Jewish religious authorities had deduced somehow or other that God's forgiveness extended to 3 offenses. I don't know how they deduced that, but that's what they thought. And so, a sinner should be punished on the 4th offense. I mean, if you were to give forgiveness a 4th time or a 5th time, then you're being more gracious than God. That's blasphemous. You can't do that. So, forgiveness is therefore limited by the law.
Is that where the 3-strike rule came?
Yeah.
It could be.
Yeah.
3 strikes and you're out.
Or 3 strikes and you're in jail.
Or you're in jail. What Peter does, Peter takes the rabbinic law 3 times. He doubles it for good measure, and then adds 1 more. just to be really, really generous. And so Peter's thinking, oh, Jesus is going to love this one. He's just going to be so happy that I came up with this. It's so generous. Jesus would be totally satisfied thinking with eager self-satisfaction that 7 times is ultimately generous and well beyond that which anyone could be expected to do. But Jesus just astounds Peter. And he tells him that a Christian must give 70 times 7. That's 490 times. That doesn't get it. That doesn't get it at all, because 70 times 7 in Jewish culture was a number that represented infinity. So don't think you're going to have to forgive somebody 490 times. You have to forgive them forever, unlimited, no end. And that's how God forgives. That's how God forgives. So Jesus then tells the story of this servant who was forgiven an enormous debt, and then went out and dealt viciously with a fellow servant who owed him a small debt that was only a small fraction of what he himself had owed. I mean, the man was without mercy. I mean, he was utterly condemned, that poor fellow. The parable teaches us a couple of lessons that Jesus never got tired of teaching. I need you to listen carefully to this, because this is a little bit convoluted, and it may help to clarify something that is in your mind that was in my mind. A person must forgive in order to be forgiven. If you're not willing to forgive your fellow man, how can you expect forgiveness from God? You know what it says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 and 15? Of course not, I'll tell you. For if you forgive men when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. And that comes right with the Lord's Prayer.
Yep.
In other words, it would appear that human forgiveness and divine forgiveness kind of go hand in hand. However, and here's my problem. However, there are a lot of sincere Christians that contest this whole concept. Anybody want to guess what the problem is?
Because they hold grudges, for one thing.
That's true.
They don't want to forgive the person.
Enabling?
It's really
Pardon?
hard to forgive some
Enabling?
people.
Enabling? No, that's not what I'm trying to get at. Of course, how would you know what my problem is? Because I've never told you. If God's grace is a free, undeserved gift, and if forgiveness is part of God's grace, then why would we be expected to earn forgiveness by forgiving others first?
That is a problem.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. It's kind of like holding a condition over your head before you can get forgiveness. You get the point? So I'm thinking, well, you know, that bothers me,
That's
because
something Bruce brings up all the time.
well, you know, my
Yeah.
idea was, and the whole Methodist thing is that, you know, grace is free. It's a free gift. It is offered, even though it's undeserved, and because God's grace is of such value, there's nothing we can possibly do to earn it anyway. So how do we deal with this? Well, I tried to work this through. This attitude is that once you understand the true nature and significance of forgiveness, and once you understand what forgiveness can do for you in your own life, only then can you appreciate receiving forgiveness from God and what it can mean in your life. The reason you forgive someone is to purge yourself.
Well, it's to set
From
yourself,
anger.
it's to set yourself free.
To set yourself free from anger, hatred,
It's the only,
whatever the problems are that you have. Forgiveness allows you to escape that, or to purge that out of your system. Now, if the person that you are forgiving accepts that forgiveness and it changes them as well, that's fine, that's extra. But initially, the nature of forgiveness is to get rid of what you have inside of you. If you are not willing to forgive, then you simply can never understand what God's forgiveness can do for you. Now, that's the only way I can get through that little maze. Okay?
well, yeah, but the antithesis of forgiveness is revenge.
That's correct.
And we see it in drama all of our lives, that revenge brings peace. You see it in movies, you see it everywhere. And of course, this is,
Revenge
the
doesn't
counter
bring
to
peace.
that.
Yeah, revenge never brings peace.
yeah, but if you can learn to forgive, then you excuse yourself from the acts of revenge.
And you know, we've all seen things like this happen on TV. This one stands out in my mind more than anything. A black woman, a mother, whose son had been brutally murdered. And she stood up in court, and instead of saying, "I hope they burn you alive, I hope you suffer all the rest of your life," and then she stood up and said, "I forgive you."
That was Charleston.
I remember that.
And it just
Charleston,
blew
South
me away.
Carolina, yeah.
And I thought, how in the world can she do that? Well, she wasn't doing it specifically for him. She was doing that for herself. She was getting rid of that terrible agony and pain and hatred, because she knew if she continued to carry that inside herself for the rest of her life, it'd eat her alive. So forgiveness heals her.
Do you have to tell the person that did that to you that you forgive them, or can you just kind of go?
I
And
can
don't
tell you-
tell them.
I can tell you that I have a person in my life
Yep.
that we have tried very hard to forgive,
It's not
and
easy,
I've never
is
said
it?
anything to her.
It said, I think, forgiving your heart.
But the problem
Oh,
with
good.
that,
Yes.
Just,
Yes.
yeah, the problem with that,
Forgiving your
and this is one of the hardest things about forgiveness, I can pray to God to forgive this person in our life. And then I feel so holy after I do this, and an hour later, I live it all over again at her. You know, I mean, and so, I think I'm trying to forgive this.
That's why you gotta do it 70 times 7.
Yeah, right, but it's, because I think we all do that, we say, "Oh, I go, okay, now I've done this." But if you eat something, that's the hard part, I think, when someone's really hurt you, then it's really hard to just.
And the other part of all this is that just because you forgive a person doesn't mean they don't have to answer to what they did. They're still accountable for what they did, and they still have to be punished in whatever way is deemed punishable by man's law, by God's law, or whatever. So forgiving somebody doesn't mean they get off the hook or anything like that. That's got nothing to do with it. The parable, however, stresses this point, and this to me is the root of the whole thing. Nothing that we can do to another person, nothing that other people can do to us, can in any way compare to what we have done to God. If God forgives us that huge debt, in the parable, by the way, it was 10,000 talents. You know what that's equal to today? Approximately 2,500,000 pounds sterling.
It's a bunch.
That's a lot of money. If God is willing to forgive us that debt, surely we can be expected to forgive our fellow man, in the parable, a debt of 100 denarii, which is equal to less than 5 pounds sterling. point is that nothing we have to forgive someone for can even come close or compare with what we have been forgiven for. A debt that is beyond paying, because the sin of mankind brought about the death and suffering of God's own Son. So we have to forgive other people, not only because it heals us, but it's the only way we can comprehend God's mercy and forgiveness offered to us. Does that make sense to people now? Alrighty. Next week,
We won't be there, we're gonna be
2 weeks
in the
from now,
wilderness like Moses.
2 weeks from now,
We're gonna be in the wilderness.
We'll be in
we'll
line.
do the parable of the master looking for workers and the parable of the two bad sons, taken from Matthew 20 and 21.